We have Laura Moore, I think. They're not Laura Moore, Laura Mart. Talk about stuff. I remember what's going on there. Anyway, 2 weeks, come on back, we'll have another one. But thanks for coming today. Today we have Nancy Knowles. Nancy Knowles is a professor of English writing and former coordinator of the Eastern Promise Language Arts Professional Learning Community. She is also a past chair and statewide Oregon Writing and English Advisory Committee and former director of the Oregon Writing Project at EOU. Nancy is a Sagittarius, enjoys long walks on the beach. Seems a little personal, but we'll move on. Dr. Knowles earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in East Asian Studies from UCLA, Master of Arts degree in English and Literature and Teaching and Writing from Humboldt State University, and a PhD in English Literature from the University of Connecticut. Although primary focus of Dr. Knowles' scholarship is literary analysis, she has had an abiding interest in scholarship of teaching since participating in the Redwood Writing Project Summer Institute in 1996. She has published articles on teaching in Oxford University Press's Literary and Linguistic Computing, the Oregon English Journal, and an anthology called Electric Collaboration in the Humanities, published by Lawrence Erlbaum, Northwest Education with Corey Brewster, and the WAC Journal with Tanya Lubis with other EOU colleagues. So, Dr. Knowles' interests include scholarship of teaching, which has been fueled by partnering from 2003 to 2015 with K-12 teachers in Oregon Writing Project to deliver effective teacher professional development, a partnership which became the foundation of the Eastern Promise Language Arts Plc. The PLC supports rural secondary teachers in offering college credit for Writing 121. Dr. Knowles' colloquium presentation will reflect results and gathered from her Eastern Promise efforts over the last 4 years. With that, Nancy Knowles.
Thank you. Gib, is the mic working? Thank you. Cool. Hi. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate your coming to listen to this presentation about the Eastern Promise. Just to give you a little sense of what the presentation will cover, I'm going to talk just briefly about concurrent enrollment or dual credit, whatever you want to call it. I'll talk about the Eastern Promise. I'll talk about the PLC and our portfolio process. I'll talk about the results that we've garnered over the last 4 years, which I think are pretty interesting. I'll do a little bit of analysis of those results and talk a little bit about recommendations. I feel like I'm still processing what I think about this whole experience, and so maybe our discussion today will help me orient in a particular direction that'll be useful for my own publication of these efforts. Just to go back, the title is 4 Years of Living Dangerously, and I did feel like I was walking a bit of a tightrope that I'll talk about in a few minutes. So the title does pertain, but perhaps not as dangerously as some of you in this room may choose to live. So my definition of danger is a bit different. Okay, so concurrent enrollment, again, you probably know some of this. The definition generally is that the high school student gets college credit and high school credit at the same time. It's sometimes also called dual credit or dual enrollment or accelerated learning. There are some sort of brand programs like College Now and Early College that you may be familiar with. And in Oregon, before the Eastern Promise came about, there were essentially 3 pathways. There was advanced placement and the International Baccalaureate, whereby students could get college credit if they took exams. Dual credit, where a qualified teacher offered college credit in the classroom, high school classroom, which still is ongoing. And dual enrollment or expanded options, often where students would come to the college campus, right? So we've had students from Union High School and the Grand High School come here to take classes, some of them taking a full load of college coursework in their senior year. Obviously that third model is difficult for students who are at a distance from a college campus. So there's been a lot of research on the benefits and challenges of concurrent enrollment. I won't run through all of these, but these are some. I think people are hoping that dual credit or concurrent enrollment will lead more students to choose college, and particularly students who might not have chosen college before taking college credit. So the credit acts as a kind of incentive to see themselves as college students. And that does seem to be a benefit that is being claimed across concurrent enrollment programs. There's also research that suggests there's some challenges to concurrent enrollment and to the research about concurrent enrollment. Some of these have to do with data, that more data is needed. Obviously, What really needs to happen is longitudinal study, which is difficult because once high school students matriculate to college, they're no longer at their high school. Once they matriculate from college, they're no longer at their college. So how do you track them over time to see what the benefits are? Some of the studies are biased by conflict of interest, which is true of my study because I'm studying my own work, which is problematic. Although I hope you'll see that I'm not overly rosy about what happened. So perhaps I'm not as biased as I could be. Also, one of the issues I think with some of the discussion of concurrent enrollment is that correlation isn't causation, right? So we can't say that because a student was part of a dual credit program that therefore they were successful in college, that concurrent enrollment caused their success, because there's so many other factors. It's really a correlation between what we're seeing with dual credit, that they were enrolled in dual credit, and that we're seeing these patterns of successful behavior on behalf of these students as they progress. So I'm a little bit hesitant about the use of causation. I think we can talk about what we think might be causing, but maybe it's that the student had a great childhood filled with books and parents who were college graduates and could propel the student into college credit in the high school. So it may not have been the dual credit or concurrent enrollment program that caused the success so much as other factors that made the student ready at the time the student needed to be ready. So there's some things I think we could talk about in terms of critiquing some of the current research. Other issues that have come up, questionable rigor, lack of faculty oversight, problems with transferring credits, which is an issue, cost, and still at-risk students, whether or not they're being included and how they're being included. So particularly students of color, and interestingly, particularly male students who seem to be accessing credits at a lower rate than female students. So something that probably requires some more exploration. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the Eastern Promise, which started here in 2012, grant funded. This is the mission statement. Again, you'll see some of the language associated with not just giving students credit for college level work, but propelling students into the college environment in a confident and productive way. That's part of the concurrent enrollment goals that are pretty typical. So Eastern Promise has been revolutionary in the sense that we have some new sort of pathways. We have a sponsored dual credit pathway, which has to do with the supervision of, again, sort of underqualified or unqualified high school teachers. We have credit by proficiency models or assessment-based models, where it's the student's work that's being assessed and maybe less emphasis on the qualification of the teacher. These models now have standards that went through, I think, the approval process at the state level last year. So we saw some of that here at Eastern. So Eastern Promise has been an instigator for thinking in innovative ways about how to do concurrent enrollment programs. This is a partnership among EOU, TVCC, BMCC, the Intermountain ESD, and the school districts participating, some of which are on the west side of the state, interestingly. So we're not just serving Eastern Oregon. And I think this is key. We're really supporting underqualified teachers. They are absolutely eminently qualified to teach secondary, right? But they are not qualified in terms of having a degree in the discipline to offer college credit. And so the goal was to make it possible for rural teachers to actually provide college credit without that key qualification piece. And as you know, we've gone on to inspire other programs across the state. So that's been really really huge revolutionary in our area and beyond. So I wanted to call your attention to some of the results that these are all from the Eastern Promise program. When they talk about saturation, they mean the numbers of students who are taking college credit. And so you can kind of see the 2003 numbers are 2013 are in red, 2014 in blue. So the CBP is credit by proficiency, which is that model where the student is assessed, the work is assessed, versus dual credit, which is the more traditional offering taught by the college, the qualified faculty member at the high school. And there's a clear increase in saturation that's happening. I want you to watch the yellow column, because the yellow column, again, is the credit by proficiency. This indicates that certain percentages of students completed high school. And if you see the credit by proficiency students, I think it's 96, something like that, 96% completed high school compared to the 60-something, that's the state average, compared to the high achieving credit by proficiency, right? So again, you can kind of watch that the yellow column. Here, again, this is students who enrolled in college. Again, that credit by proficiency column is higher. Again, whether that's a correlation or causality, again, is something to think about. And here is a percentage of students who stayed enrolled in college. And you can see, again, there's a significant difference between the average at the state and compared to what the concurrent enrollment students are doing. Yes?
The change in the blue bar is really dramatic.
Dramatic.
Relative to the yellow.
Right. So even though the students are high achieving, they haven't done dual credit. And again, maybe there's something there to be uncovered about what's going on. Yeah. So I wanted to talk also a little bit about the Language Arts Plc. As Rory said, it originated in the Oregon Writing Project network of teachers. Dan Milkey wasn't planning to do writing initially. It wasn't part of the proposal, but when I heard what was happening, I went and had a conversation with him about this sort of existing network that was already present that could support this kind of work. And so we went forward with the PLC. We brought secondary and post-secondary teachers to the table. We had quarterly meetings, which are continuing this year, hosted at BMCC. We did a lot of strategy sharing and scoring and norming of portfolios. So we've had quite a lot of teacher dialogue over the last almost 5 years at the PLC. And I want to talk a little bit about my role. So I was the EPLA PLC coordinator. So, and this is my show, so I'm there in the middle. But I wanted to talk about the pressures that I felt in trying to do this work, and this is the dangerously part. So I was beholden to my own colleagues and to national standards and their view of national standards. I was beholden to the registrars and the registrars' needs, and also beholden to the teachers in the district. So I was trying to juggle all these aspects of my work, and it was quite stressful to try to meet the needs of everybody. So the Oregon Writing and English Advisory Committee is a state-level advisory committee. It's been around since the 1970s. And we've had quite a lot of conversations about concurrent enrollment, to do it or to not do it, those kinds of things, and if to do it, how to do it well. So these are some things that emerged in a policy document, partly in a policy document, partly in conversations at these meetings, about concerns with dual credit or concurrent enrollment. And they're definitely worried about equivalency. Are these courses equivalent? Not only in teacher qualifications, but in content. I'm going to highlight a couple things. Adult level readings, right? So our student, not that we're trying to teach adult material, but that the readings are at the adult level, and that the topics covered are topics that would be of interest to adults, right? So we're concerned about that. We're also concerned, particularly in the field of writing, with enrollment caps, because if teachers don't have enough time to provide feedback on drafts, then the students won't progress, and they won't be operating at the college level. So if you imagine about 20 minutes per draft, times the number of students in each class, times 2 to 3 drafts per paper, then suddenly the teacher's home life is disrupted by the sheer quantity of workload. So this is an important component for the teachers at the state level. The teachers are also concerned about the lack of academic freedom, right? So here at Eastern, we have quite a bit of academic freedom to design and insist upon quality in our courses. At the high school level, the teachers don't have that freedom. If the administrator says, thou shalt have 35 students in this classroom, you can make that argument, but it may not be successful, and it may simply be a matter of the scale of the administrator's duties and the difficulty of juggling. The OEAC was also concerned about the quality of student learning, particularly that there are authentic end assessments. You may know that an authentic assessment of writing probably needs to be writing. It should be obvious, right? And not only that, but if we're assessing information literacy skills. It's very difficult to assess those skills if the students aren't doing research. So when you think about the potential options for authentic assessment, it really becomes quite limited. And I'll show you what we ended up doing in Eastern Promise. There's some control about, again, administrator versus faculty control of the curriculum, some concern about the budget, right? So at institutions where concurrent enrollment becomes a huge percentage of the institution budget, suddenly there's pressures on the quality, right? If we can't cut this program because we're dependent upon the program. So there's some issues that have happened in the state associated with that. Concern about the college credit meaning college credit, definitely a problem. Some institutions of higher education are not taking concurrent enrollment writing 121. They take a look at the student's high school graduation date, and if the student took coursework before that date, they don't accept it because they want to make sure that the quality's there. There's also issues that concern OEAC teachers in terms of developmental moment, right? So if high school students are not developmentally ready for writing 121 and we're putting them in writing 121 at the high school level, and then they get to college and that's the moment for it and we don't have it available for them because they've already taken it, what problems might arise? Similarly, what happens to students who complete a quantity of concurrent enrollment college credit before they get to college? They enter college as juniors, and developmentally they're not on the same level as their peers at the upper division. Does that matter? Does it matter when they matriculate beyond the institution of higher education? So these are just, again, some philosophical issues that OEAC teachers are concerned about. They're concerned also about the quality of the student's secondary education outside of dual credit. So what happens when you funnel your high-performing students into separate classes? What happens to the rest of the curriculum if those students aren't there to work with the other students, right? What issues might arise if they're tracked in that way? And you know, if the districts are paying for college credit, even cheap college credit, couldn't that money be used in a more effective way, right? These are, again, some questions that were concerning to them. They were, of course, concerned about job loss. What happens when we decide that a certain kind of teacher is more appropriate? What happens when the credits run through the high school? What happens to our part-time faculty at the college level who are teaching all of those 100-level courses? So those were issues they were concerned about as well. They're concerned about the widening gap, right? If these students are coming from families who could otherwise afford college, who are college-bound already, why are we investing in them? And why aren't we investing in others? Are we using this rhetoric of serving at-risk students to actually direct money toward privileged students, right? So again, some philosophical issues. One thing to note about the Eastern Promise, which is interesting, is that I think we're doing relatively well serving our populations of color, for example. So this kind of data is really important to determining whether we're meeting our promises about making college credit accessible for all students. Okay, I think maybe this is the last little bit. So again, this might make sense. We need longitudinal assessment. We need to know that students are meeting national standards. There are national standards for dual concurrent enrollment programs, and are we working with them? How are we aligning ourselves with them? If dual enrollment credit looks the same as regular college credit, how do you track? Right? So now we're starting to track maybe based on high school graduation date in combination with credit, and we might be able to do some work using those things. Okay, so thinking about the other side, the other pressures on this issue, districts are interested in quantity because it's, you know, if students are ready for college credit, let's give them as much as we can. If you have handouts in front of you, I put a few around. This is just a sample of one way in which credit might be quantified by a district, right? This was a handout that we used a few years ago. It's really helpful to help students to know kind of how their credit's going to be spent. If they're headed for community college, maybe the Oregon Transfer Module or the AAOT. But what happens when you start to say, oh, okay, Pendleton has X number of college credits available, and Helix only has X number? When you start to sort of pit districts against each other in terms of quantity, there might be some problems associated with that. That was an issue, right? So if people are interested more in the quantity than the quality, are we having some problems? Yes, Steve?
Sorry, Nancy, I don't understand that. So districts, school districts only have so many college credits that they can allow students to take? Is that because of pay or resources available?
I think it's because of either teacher qualifications or PLC structures that would support underqualified teachers. So we have available only certain courses, and some courses aren't available in some districts, right? And so if we're starting to think about who's got the most, and districts are sort of marketing themselves against one another, quantity issue may become an issue, something worth talking about. Does that make sense? Yeah. In situations where students are generally passing, to have a course where students could fail is a shock, something that we discovered. So again, that was an issue, and definitely we experienced stakeholder pressure associated with that. Districts are bound by their own fiscal and structural needs, and so the pressures they've experienced have to do with putting the right kids in the right classrooms with the right teachers. And they have to manage a whole schedule of those things in addition to any concurrent enrollments. And so sometimes that causes some interesting difficulties. They were dealing also with timing. What they found is that writing 121 helped students with the Smarter Balance exams, which students take at grade 11. And so they wanted to offer writing 121 at the junior year, when students are 16, 17 years old. But then the question arose, well, what do we do then with the senior year, which tends to be a question. If the students are getting college credit and they're getting it in their junior year, what is your fourth year of language arts instruction? What should it look like? So these kinds of things were pressures that were happening at the district level. I wanted also to mention registrar pressures. So the registrars at our institutions were particularly interested in ensuring equivalency in terms of registration. So once the students had registered for a term, they had to follow the calendar of drop dates, just like any other student. And communicating that information was quite difficult, as I'm sure Chris Mulvihill would say. Trying to sort of orient families to college operating procedures was a barrier and a difficulty. It was also difficult in the sense that we might not know how successful a student would be until the student was beyond the drop date. And my feeling was these students are doing a really hard thing, and I'd much rather have them not get the credit than to get an F. But that didn't sit well with registrars, because that's not what registrars want to make sure there's equivalent and fair treatment of all students. So I was trying to be unfair, I guess. Also, we were trying to time things right? So that when students enrolled, could they enroll in fall? Could they enroll in winter? We ended up enrolling students in spring so that most of our work could be done by the time the drop date happened. But again, sort of gaming the system that way was difficult. Okay. So this is a description of the process that we used in the PLC to assess students' achievements. We had a portfolio of materials, authentic materials that the students generated in their classroom contexts. These portfolios were double or triple scored, which means that a high school teacher or college teacher was reading and scoring the portfolio. And if there was a discrepancy following two teachers scoring it, there was a third teacher scoring, right? And if there were further questions, more scoring happened. So we did quite a lot of reading of these portfolios to make sure that we were operating equivalently to one another. You can't read that, obviously, but this is our rubric. Again, this is in front of you. If you have handouts in front of you, you can share with each other. If you're interested, I wanted to make sure you had it to take away so you could see how we were scoring writing, what we were looking for. And we were trying to meet the outcomes that are listed in the left-hand column are oriented toward national outcomes, which meant that we had to deal with research, we had to deal with reflection, the students had to be able to think metacognitively about their writing, in addition to the typical grammar and organization and focus that you might expect. So here are the results, and maybe more danger. Danger, danger. So I want you to notice a couple of things. One is our passing rate. We started off about half passing, which was shocking for our teachers and our students our first year. Notice where we are now. So we're asking students, high school students, to do a hard thing, and not all of them are ready to do that. We're asking teachers to do a hard thing, and not all of them are ready to do that. I want you to notice also the failures due to plagiarism. So patchwork plagiarism is where students take language from this source and that source and this source and cobble it together so that it looks as if they wrote it, but it's actually coming from all these other sources. We had 25% patchwork plagiarism our first year out of the gate. Notice what happened. That never happened again. We stopped it, right? So one real advantage of this work is that teachers talk to teachers and they improve their practice. We got rid of that one completely, or nearly completely. I think in 2015 we had a student that pulled this I believe essay off the web and turned it in, so that got caught. That was, not something we were imagining would still be happening, but once in a while. What ended up happening, what we found more often when we learned to look more carefully, is how students were using their sources. And you have, again, a third handout in front of you that talks a little bit about the range of ways in which things can go wrong. At the top of the chart is the typical kinds of plagiarism where students are stealing other people's work, and patchwork plagiarism where they may even be thinking they're doing it right, but they're really not, and terribly not. But there are other ways in which students can misuse sources, right? They can plagiarize language, which means they may be citing the sources, but they're still not putting the source information in quotations. They can plagiarize ideas, right? So they may not be admitting the ideas are coming from somewhere, even though the language belongs to them. Or they could misrepresent sources, right? Either because they haven't read the sources very well, which is typical with difficult sources. In some cases, we found that students just took their citations, their in-text citations, and scattered them all over the paper. So there was all coming from the sources, but the citations weren't indicating right in which source was coming from which. So we learned quite a lot, and we became pretty good at assessing how students were using their sources. Last bit of results I want you to notice is our Integrator Reliability, right? So remember, these are high school teachers and college teachers reading together and assessing together. And the Integrator Reliability is when they're a point or less apart, right? So if the score was a 1 and a 3, then that's not good. But if the score is a 1 and a 2, when it's pretty close, again, that's tracking how close we were. So our Integrator Reliability from the get-go has been pretty good. And I had a teacher last year who scored 30 portfolios, and he contacted me and he said, I've given every portfolio a 2. And I was like, okay. He's like, I'm freaking out. Like, am I just grumpy? Like, what's going on? So I went back and took a look, and indeed, every other scorer had given 30 portfolios a 2. I mean, they were so well aligned, they knew exactly what was happening with the portfolios. So that has been a real advantage of this process, as we've gotten on the same page about what makes student quality in writing. So, how am I doing on time? I'm thinking about our clock situation. I've got a half an hour? Okay, super. Okay, I'm going to run through talk a little bit about successes and challenges, ongoing challenges, some of which I think we knew were going to be challenges before we started. The successes, some students are earning college credit. That's great. So it's good. They're doing a hard thing, and some of them are quite capable of doing it well. We have standards now for the kinds of proficiency-based assessment that we're doing in Eastern Promise at the state level, which is a benefit. We've got a nice collaboration among institutions in the region and good dialogue happening among expert secondary teachers who are incredibly hardworking, dedicated college faculty, amazing librarians who are totally willing to go out to districts or have districts come to campus to support this effort. And the districts have been committed to being at the table, which has been really exciting. If we hadn't offered college credit, I don't know if we would have gotten the attention of districts to have this kind of conversation. And so I think that's been really, really powerful. I think it's rigorous, the kind of work that we're doing. Obviously, not every student is passing. We're expecting quite a lot of them. And we're having dialogue not only in the room, but also across grade levels. So some of the teachers I'm working with teach, they may teach juniors and seniors. So when they work with juniors, they're thinking about what to do, how to scaffold those juniors into doing college level work their senior year. If they are at a small school, they may teach 6th grade up, which means the 6th grade curriculum and the 7th grade curriculum and the 8th grade curriculum is different, right? So this has been a really powerful experience. And as I said, I think the Integrator Reliability demonstrates that teachers at least know what they're looking at when they're looking at student work samples. Challenges, obviously I don't want to fail 50% of these students. That's not a good number. So we're having ongoing difficulty with particular aspects of what we're asking them to do. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The portfolio process, really great for dialogue, but it's really cumbersome. It takes a long time, and it's frustrating for teachers that we're using a sort of tip of the iceberg sample to determine yay or nay whether these students get credit, when this teacher is working with the student for weeks and months. And that stuff doesn't seem to count or be considered in this process. Obviously, if we're failing 50%, Writing 121 is still not accessible for many of our regional students. And that's a concern. So some other aspects I want to talk about is structural difference, right? So there are key differences between the college setting and the high school setting. And this is why I don't think we can treat them the same, quite the same, that it doesn't map, they don't map onto one another in the same way. The institutional supports are missing. Librarians are missing. In 3 of the 16 schools that we worked with in 2014, they had qualified librarians. The rest did not, right? So it's hard to support this work without having colleagues who know how to teach this kind of material. We're missing college level databases. We're missing access to computer labs in high schools. We're having trouble associated with the way in which courses, the way in which students move from course to course. So if their English class has certain guidelines about research that are happening for Writing 121, but all their other classes are handling research differently, we're having trouble with students knowing that this is important, that this kind of research that they're doing and the way we're asking them to do it is important. We have enrollments exceeding course caps. We have classrooms with multiple levels. So a teacher might have 35 students, and she has regular high school, Writing 115, and 121 in the same classroom. That's really hard to teach to those groups all at the same time. And again, that stakeholder expectation that students will pass is a problem. I think we saw some vulnerability, right? Teachers' sense of their professional efficacy is on the line if their students are not passing. They are vulnerable not only in their own confidence, but in the eyes of all the stakeholders around them. And this has been a really scary thing for them to do and for me to try to help them do. We've seen some problems where, for example, a teacher was put on leave for teaching pop lyrics, which is something that a college faculty member would have no hesitation in doing. So there have been aspects associated with their work environments that have been difficult. We've seen health issues and stress issues arise. We've seen teachers try to insist on course caps and not have the administration listen, and they've left the district as a result. So there have been difficulties associated with those things. One thing I'd like to have you think about is maturity. This is one way of thinking about what we're asking college-level writers to do. We're not asking them to write narratives. In fact, we call it expository writing, but we're not really even asking for that. We're asking for argumentation, which is the most difficult of the writing, kinds of writing that we do. We're asking students to theorize about experience, to take data and make claims about it. And they may not be developmentally ready to do this kind of work. One way to think about this is first-year college students are often absolute knowers, right? It's either right or wrong. And so if we're asking high school students to do this kind of claims-based argumentation, is it too early, right? If it's hard for even seniors to do it, is it too early? They have difficulty particularly with objective tone. The smackdown is not an effective argumentation style. They have trouble with unsupported generalizations, right, which seem to be truths, but need to be supported with data. They have difficulty separating their voice from a source voice and the source's voices, right? So the source may have sources, and they have trouble differentiating who's saying what. And as we've seen, they have trouble with unethical integration of sources having to do potentially with maturity level rather than skill. One aspect of the secondary environment may be that they're comfortable there, right? They know the teachers if they've been in the district from kindergarten up. They may not feel pressed to make stronger arguments or to think outside the box in ways they might if they came to a college campus and had conflicting ideas. They may not understand writing as a disciplinary practice in the way that they might if they came to campus and worked with faculty who were had masters in the disciplines or more. And they may not have a connection to college culture in the same way. If you're here, you're learning how to navigate college culture. And much of that work happens in, for example, our uni courses, but it also happens in our Writing 121 courses. And if they're not in college culture, how are they navigating that? Okay. So these are my sort of concluding thoughts. I'm going to run through them relatively quickly, and maybe our dialogue can help me determine if there are other things I should be thinking about that I haven't considered. We need to continue to insist on quality if we're going to do this work. Some of the concurrent enrollment, most of the concurrent enrollment programs in the state do not have authentic assessment. They assess, if at all, with the timed writing sample, which doesn't meet all of our objectives. So we need to have authentic assessment to know whether we're actually awarding college credit. We need to have faculty time for this kind of dialogue. We need to have dialogue across concurrent enrollment programs, and we need to have ongoing teacher dialogue. We need to have longitudinal assessment so that we know if this is really working. We need to have qualified librarians and databases and course caps and single-level classrooms and all the kinds of things you'd have at a college, and professional development for our colleagues across the disciplines to support this work with research. And this is my plug for my, I don't know, I have a pie in the sky plug. I'd love to have an online master's degree available to these language arts teachers that gives them the disciplinary background to do what we're asking them to do. And I think that we can continue to experiment with contexts, how to handle that difference in context, how to handle the difference in qualifications, how to handle the partnership between college faculty and high school faculty. Eastern Promise has made some really important dialogues possible, but we could do more if we had the opportunity to continue to talk to each other. So, thank you to all the fabulous people I've worked with. It's been a tough road, I think, for all of us. I want to thank the teachers I've worked with, the students who've been patient with this process, the districts and parents. Dan Milkey has been absolutely fabulous. When I had freak out moments about what was happening, I would just go talk with him and he would sort of talk me off the ledge. So I really value his patience and his expertise. My colleagues at Blue Mountain, Allison Timmons and Ashley Benson, have been invaluable partners. And my faculty colleagues in English Writing and Library, I just can't say enough how much I've valued your ongoing hand-holding and expertise. So thank you. You can clap now.
Questions for Nancy?
Hold on. You have to have a microphone.
Yeah, get to.
Okay, if the students don't pass the portfolio review, what happens with their grading in the high school class?
Oh, great question. Oh, I have a mic. Thank you. Yeah, so essentially the high school grade is different from the college grade. right? The portfolio process, for almost all, there may have been one classroom where the teacher decided to have them be completely linked. But usually what they did was the college grade was dependent on the portfolio process, so that if the student passed the portfolio, the student could get college credit, and the teacher would assign a grade. And the grade might or might not be the same as the high school grade, because the high school grade might be a whole year of language arts, and the college grade might be certain set assignments that were part of that college syllabus. So there's a difference. Yeah, it's a good question.
So just one thing that occurred to me, when I was amazed at all the different things, all the different issues you had to deal with. When you were talking about the how difficult it was for these students to get a passing grade in writing, I wonder if part of that was because they were taking writing was one of the few things they were taking at the college level, and you were talking about how they were using the smackdown as an argument. But if they were taking other college level courses in rhetoric or philosophy or logic or almost anything, it might help give them the foundation to write better. So maybe it's the fact that the writing is happening at this higher level kind of on its own without other supportive disciplines.
I think that's true. I think that's true from talking with teachers. I think that's true. So if the classroom was using particular practices that we had trained on using, particularly oriented toward use of text, for example, and then the students were going into other classrooms where the teachers were had different ideas about how text could be used and how, particularly, just to give an example, if teachers are not reading the students' sources, the teachers can't know how the students are using the sources. And so I spent most of my career not reading my students' sources. So I probably permitted many, many underprepared students to go out into the world. But as I learned, to do my job better, which I hope I'm always doing, I found that I have to look at and my students maybe can tell me, Kara's here and Neil's here, right? I have to look at your sources to be able to grade your work and to help you use them. And so it's a difficult practice. So if students are doing that in the writing class and then they go out, the teachers in the other classrooms are not checking student sources, that's giving a different message to students about how to use sources, right? So I think there's some sort of reciprocal echoing that happens in the school, and that may be true here on this campus too. I might challenge my colleagues to say, if you're doing research, are you looking at your students' sources and seeing how they're using them? Because I think we support one another in sharing best practices across disciplines.
Nancy, what did you mean by checking sources? Is you look at the reference and the citation? Do you actually look at the article or the book that the students have used and compare that to what they're saying? And that's a lot of work.
I got to tell you. And I've done it for hundreds of other people's students.
That's commendable.
But but there's ways to do it. One might be to have a class set of materials that you've read that the students are working with, right? Another might be to have the students submit their research materials so that you have easy access to them. I get irritated with my students when they give me a link that goes to a source where I have to log in and pay for the source. I'm not doing that, but I do want to, so I say, okay, no, you get the source and you give it to me. And so again, sometimes we go back and forth a while before we get that resolved.
That's a learning skill in itself.
For sure. Well, and I think sometimes students think that whatever's on the first page of that for-profit source is enough, right? That the abstract is enough. And they're maybe quoting from the abstract. And I'm like, no, you actually have to read the whole article, right? So, these are things that I think I'm teaching, not only in my writing classes, but in my literature classes. They're skills, sort of life skills for graduating students who know how to handle source materials. Yeah. Yana.
So this is a pretty general question on concurrent enrollment. You were saying that in 2016, I think the number for passing students was 35%.
It was.
Which is, to me, that's very low. So it
Yes.
means 65% of the students failed.
Yes.
Do you think that that might discourage the students from going to college instead of the program actually encouraging them, which should be the case?
Yes, especially if it's the only college class they're taking. But I've also worked with students who failed my portfolio process, who came to Eastern, and they were much better prepared when they got here, having had that experience. They were ahead of their peers in the classroom, and they were more competent. That aspect is really interesting. I'm not sure what to do with it because there's an emotional component.
Right.
And so maybe what we need to do is not offer 121 credit in the high schools. Maybe that's not what we should do if they can't pass it.
Well, maybe a follow-up question would be which students actually do it? You know, the students who do it, wouldn't those be the students that would go to college afterwards anyways? So
So are we actually benefiting them?
exactly. Are we reaching the right people, the right students? And when we reach them, do we reach them in a positive way
Yeah.
by getting them to pass and to go on to college, or do we just discourage them more by them failing the college course?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that for me that's the danger, right? We're living, we're working, trying to do this thing in the right way, so that the credit means something, and so that the students are propelled forward. And juggling those things is really difficult. Or it seems, and I don't know, my colleagues who are doing dual credit in other disciplines, I look at them and I think, boy, they're not having the kind of problem I'm having. Is it that writing is just harder? Is it that that the structures that are required to make writing function are not there? Is it that, because the students who have skills in math, for example, I have a 13-year-old child who's in geometry right now, so she's got the skills. But is there another sort of developmental piece that writing requires that's maybe not necessary for skill-based? I don't know. I mean, these are questions I have that I would love to think through further.
Mm-hmm.
So one question I have is that, having had 2 kids
Yeah.
do this, is that has there ever been a requirement other than the parents signing that they can take the class, but making the parents come and understand the obligation? Because for me, having had 2 kids do this, it
Yeah.
required a lot of dinner table conversations about what they're writing, asking them why they're going that way, and so on. And of course, like you already said, my kids are advantaged because they're growing up in a household with parents who have college degrees.
Right.
But I found that for my children, they would not have found success unless we'd had all those conversations. And I knew to have those conversations, but I bet there are a whole bunch of other parents out there that don't know to do that.
That's a great
Right.
question. And it's not something I've thought about. And I think this may be pertaining to sort of concurrent enrollment as a whole. So how do we acclimate the family to what we're asking the students to do? That it would be great to be able to run some parent programs. One thing I've done a little bit of work with parent literacy, and my College of Education folks may know better than I do about this, but it's really hard to get the right people at the table at parent events. And so the question would be, how do we get the families that need to be at the table to the table so we can have conversations about what this looks like? Yeah, great.
One way would be to go to the families.
Yeah,
And have people hosted in their homes and bring food and talk that way.
great idea.
I mean, I think sometimes school is intimidating for parents. And really, parents are also intimidating to the teachers.
Yes.
And so I think if you could remove them away and have those kind of honest conversations in their home area where they would be modeling what they would do with their child, that would be one way to think about
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Was this effort merely limited to the class time already set aside for language arts in the high school setting? And was there consideration made to making this a partially extracurricular activity?
Interesting.
Because the college environment has so much more expectation on outside of classroom work than the
Yeah.
high school environment does.
Yeah.
Were there efforts by any teachers to involve students in extracurricular access to this?
That's a great question. As far as I know, no. And perhaps because the rigors of dealing with drafts are such that teachers may not have a lot of outside class time themselves to do that kind of work. I do think they were sort of bound by the language arts curriculum in the sense that they had to figure out how to fit this college level work into either a term of language arts or a year of language arts. And so they had to use what they had, the structure that they had. However, I know that there are some districts who are having their high-performing students actually take online English and writing classes, and then the high school teacher provides support. You know what I mean? So when I think about innovation, that's an interesting innovation in what we're trying to do, because the student would get online instruction perhaps that they could access during their course period, and then also this high school teacher, language arts teacher who's an expert in their field, to provide like tutoring and backup discussion for whatever's happening in the online environment, particularly since the online environment is, I think, more difficult. And so, I mean, so that might get at something like what you're talking about, where the student is putting in some additional time. Or maybe they do the online instruction outside class hours and they come to school and the teacher works with them. Yeah.
Okay, my question is similar to Linda's, and I was wondering how you found the teachers, how you found the students, how you prepared the students. And a follow-up is, did the students have to work with Canvas?
Mm-hmm.
And did they have to be taught how to use Canvas and all
yeah.
that? And what was the pacing? Was it a term at a time or extended? And I think I know the answer. It's a term, isn't it?
No, well, it varied.
Okay.
So we were pretty flexible with teachers' class structures. So we said, okay, you have to have a syllabus and you have to have at least some assignments that are, you know, flagged as writing 121 assignments. And you can run a 10-week term if you want. But you could also integrate that work into your regular language arts curriculum in such a way that you can deliver the high school content as well as this college content that we're adding on top. So some teachers were doing 10-week, some were doing 14-week, and some were doing year-long language arts curriculum in which the Writing 121 was embedded. So it depended on the district and the teacher's needs or preferences. The preparation that students had was primarily their language arts instruction, and as teachers got more familiar with the college level expectations, they backloaded scaffolding. You know, so as they started to work with the Writing 121 curriculum, they started to go back and alter junior level English or sophomore level English, so that students were in a pipeline with skills that were building toward that sort of college level moment. We had some trouble with placement. So we at first we thought, okay, we'll let the teacher pick the students. But then the districts sometimes put pressure on teachers to pick certain students, and parents put pressures on teachers to pick certain students. And so we eventually moved toward placement, which makes sense because we insist on placement here at Eastern. But then we tried to give students access to AccuPlacer, and it turns out there's a student-by-student cost above a certain number of AccuPlacer accesses, and suddenly we were charging massive amounts into the testing center. So we had all these kind of mishaps associated with what the entry point was going to be for students getting into this college credit. What ended up happening is that we started to use the Smarter Balanced assessment as a signal, right? So if the students scored the kinds of scores they would need to get into 121 at the college level when they arrived here on campus, that was a signal that they might be ready in the high school. So we started to do that. And then on the back end, like I said, we tried to run the portfolio process before or during the early part of the term in which they were enrolled, in a sense protecting students from a failing grade so that we could pull them out of that class before. If they weren't going to pass, and we knew they weren't going to pass, that we would just drop them from the class. So we had kind of multiple strategies for dealing with that issue. I'm not sure we ever perfected any of that. Did that answer all of your questions? Oh, Canvas, great question. Okay, so no, not initially, but now I think they will, because Blue Mountain just got Canvas this year. And so we had them working through BMCC's old system, where they had to upload their portfolios in the old system, but now it's Canvas because BMCC has Canvas. And that's an advantage because they get some familiarity with the learning management system at this college and that college ahead of going to college and using a learning management system elsewhere. So yeah, they're starting to get, starting to do that, which I think is really helpful.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Jill.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
I also work with Eastern Promise, and one of the issues in Spanish is that depends on how long it's been since they graduated high school and how much of a gap they have. So I'm curious. You mentioned that similar problem that sometimes they will have passed the high school equivalent, but they're really not prepared. And I wondered if you had the experience where students were able to, to recognize that and say, that, it's worth it to them to pay for the credit again because they know they need it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the struggles that I'm having, is to convince people, because then further gaps in time don't help with the issue as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop there. I have more questions.
I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I can speak to the, one thing I think is beneficial for students, normally you think you lose skills, and we have documented that students lose skills and disciplines over the summer break, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I think that's beneficial for students is when they graduate high school and they take 3 months off, and they come back to college, they've had a little bit of time to process what they were doing in the high school, and to reflect kind of metacognitively on how that all went and how they imagine college will be different. I do think that in some cases that time off helps because they can refocus and sort of marshal the stuff that they learned that they can apply in this new context. And I think the students that sort of failed the portfolio process and then ended up in my classroom, I think they were able to, one of the reasons why they were able to do a better job when they got here was that they had done that stuff and learned some stuff from that and came back and applied it in a new, fresh context. And the students were quite successful here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
A little bit. I mean, I think we always want to be careful not to oversell.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that tendency as well, just because there is a benefit to doing more groundwork and more legwork. But I think in your case, where you work so closely with the BMCC faculty, that's a real advantage.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the dialogue across the board was hugely important to my teaching and my understanding of the K-12 system, to have these dialogues with teachers.
Right, because we have Eastern Promise credit and we have dual language
Mm-hmm.
credit, and they're not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so it actually makes me think that I need to do a better job with the dual language communications. So
Interesting, yeah.
Thanks for planting that seed.
Thank you.
So, given a theoretical average high school and ideal implementation of this at that high school, what percentage of students do you think would be appropriately taking advantage of this?
I mean, ideally, if we imagine that high school students are capable of earning college credit for composition, for first-term composition, it would be great to have full senior level classes doing this work, because that would mean that everyone has access. And in some districts, that's what was happening. The whole senior class was being run through the Writing 121 curriculum. Not everyone submitted a portfolio, but they all had an opportunity. So I think that would be great, because then then even if the student decided not to submit, not to try, or they tried and they didn't pass, they could see the sort of horizon of what's to come when they get to college in a way that they couldn't. And I don't know, again, it would be really nice maybe to do a survey of our students about attitudes. You know, so okay, you went through this Writing 121 experience. Did you pass or not? What do you think? How do you feel? What do you expect out of college now? Do you think you're capable of college? I mean, it might be a really interesting endeavor to ask students those questions.
Thanks.
How about one more, Nancy? Maybe two.
So, Nancy, I apologize. I missed your presentation.
You know all about it
stuck in
anyway.
another meeting. So maybe you've already answered part of this. But I guess I'm really interested in the way that data on these kinds of projects get collected in a context in which they are being pushed increasingly for reasons of money, right? I mean, this isn't about like, nobody's been complaining that college graduates write too well, so let's get it over with for them. This is about compressing the amount of time to graduation. Yeah. It's about lowering the cost of college. It's about getting high school teachers to do the work of college faculty so you don't have to pay them to do it. I mean, it's a social project and political project that's about money. I had the opportunity to interview one of the students who failed the portfolio project just by happenstance on my own sabbatical research. And, first generation college student who learned over the summer between graduating high school and going to college that he had failed for plagiarism, was totally mortified. I mean, had no idea why he had plagiarized, didn't think of himself as a dishonest person. There was no place for him ever to find out what happened. But he also then went ahead and took Writing 121 at Oregon State and was able to say what a profoundly different experience it was. And in fact, it was one of his favorite classes as a first-year student. And an incredibly articulate, engaged student who loved what he learned there. And I guess I wonder, in this accountability context, in this rush to look at student grade point average to show that a program is successful, if there's any room to do the kind of qualitative follow-up research that you're talking about, getting an understanding from students of what the benefit was of any given experience, instead of just good enough, got the students done, it all looks fine from some macro quantitative level. Or is anybody listening to any of that? Is there any place to send any of that information, even if it were gathered?
Well, I think that when we talk about longitudinal assessment, we often talk about the kinds of data that Eastern Promise has collected in partnership with Education Northwest, which has to do with aggregate, graduation rate, college entry rate, persistence rates. But that's not the kind of research that you're looking for. And it would be nice if we had longitudinal assessments that also did qualitative kinds of things in terms of connecting with the students and their experience. I think given that we're already doing longitudinal research of the numeric kind, we could supplement that with qualitative kinds of research. And the place for that exists because we're already doing the longitudinal work. Money-wise, yeah, I think it would cost money. But maybe not. Maybe we could put a nice little Google form up there and direct students to it, and we might get some stuff. But in terms of having interviewers actually go out and meet with students the way you were able to do, that would be a lot more expensive.
My question really wasn't about, is there an audience for the research I did? It's more,
No.
in this context, I think that it's totally stacked against actually evaluating what this experience means for students.
Well, and I
It's
think
cheap,
that's...
and the numbers will keep showing that it's worth doing.
And I think that's that correlation versus causation issue, right? So we're looking at this data and we're assuming that if the student is persisting in college, that there's a causal relationship between the concurrent enrollment program and that work. And we really need to drill down into the data to know for sure why the student's persisting and what effect that dual credit experience had on the student. Yeah.
One more, Nancy?
Sure.
I think they're quick.
Okay.
I actually have three, but I think they're easy. The 53% in 2013 on the passer rating, you said that was surprising. What was the expectation, that it would be higher than that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I expected 75%.
Okay.
I mean, just because that, I don't know. You see average, you kind of want to think that we could get there.
Right.
So I was shocked, and I had colleagues who were teaching those students who were shocked. There was one teacher that I had some interaction with last year his whole class the first year didn't pass the portfolio. The second year, I think 2 students passed the portfolio. Interestingly, one thing he said to me was that the PLC work was the most powerful learning experience he'd ever had, because he didn't know what he didn't know until he put his students in the position to help test what was going on. And so, I think that kind of dialogue is really powerful. What I didn't like about it is that the students were our guinea pigs in a lot of ways, especially that first year. And I think that I like to insulate them from that at the same time as we're making these opportunities available to them.
The portfolio raters, do they include high school teachers?
Yep. I think it's maybe 60% high school teachers, 40% college teachers. So
Yeah, that just drives further questions for me, so I won't go there. But is there a barrier to getting your online master's degree program? You said it was a plug.
It's a plug, yeah. Let's do an online master's degree. Let's make the sort of discipline of rhetoric and composition available to secondary teachers. I think no one in the state has an online master's degree in composition and rhetoric or in teaching writing. We could do it, and we could serve our own secondary teachers, and we could serve a population of teachers across the nation who want this kind of.
Is there something stopping that from going forward? Or is it
time and money? Yeah. Budgets. I have a scope document.
Excellent.
Thank you much, Nancy.
Thank
Thanks, folks.
you.
There's lots of treats left and some brownies.